Welcome to Spiritual Foundations for Life. This is day number 308. The book of Hebrews starts by presenting Jesus as greater than the angels, greater than Moses, and greater than all other mortals. The purpose of the book of Hebrews is to help the church transition from the old covenant law, like the old covenant of law, to the new covenant of grace, both in our living and in our thinking. Under the Mosaic law, the priests would continue offering sacrifices for sins. That is no longer necessary because Jesus died once for all sins, according to Hebrews chapter 7, verses 23 and 24, and Romans chapter 6, verses 6 to 10. What is Jesus doing now? 1 John chapter 2, verse 1 tells us, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one." I want to share with you now a testimony of a woman who transitioned from the old to the new covenant, to the old covenant way of thinking, to the new covenant truth in her thought life. This is what she said. "For as long as I can remember, I have struggled with extremely low self-esteem and a crippling lack of confidence. I remember writing several times in my diary when I was 15, 'I hate myself. Why can't I be like anyone other than myself?' I had a bleak outlook on my future, and I figured I would never change. The entire time I was a born-again Christian, and I knew Christ had saved me at the age of 7. I was raised in a Bible-believing Christian home and church. When going through the steps to freedom in Christ, I finally stepped back, and I saw that one of the major root causes of my horrible sense of embarrassment and crippling regret and shame was the legalistic form of Christianity in which I was raised. The difficult thing about legalism is that grace can appear to be preached, but what is actually acted out is judgmental, critical, perfectionistic, and performance-based living. Finally, I began to understand that my relationship with God was not based on how early I got up in the morning to pray, or how well I knew my Bible, or how sin-free I managed to keep myself, or how committed I was to church activities. I had grown up with no comprehension of how to feel accepted by God just as I was, without having to first fulfill an impossible list of requirements. The whole thing was one big guilt trip. I was racked by guilt for not being able to pray the way I knew I should, for not feeling like God was hearing me, and for not enjoying reading the Bible. I felt obliged to be at every church service, and I eagerly wanted people to think of me as holy, spiritually minded, and a strong Christian, even though I wasn't any of those things. The teaching I had received as a teen convinced me that God had abandoned me because of my struggle with particular sins. The verse that said, "If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened," according to Psalm 66, verse 18, it rang in my ears every time I tried to pray. That left me in limbo land, unable to pray, unable to stop sinning. Everyone else was keeping up the pretense of perfectionism and holiness. No one let on that they were struggling with sin or experiencing any lack of closeness with God. Well, you know what? This woman who wrote this article or this note is a clear example of what Paul wrote in Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. All who rely on the works of the law, they're under a curse. Thankfully, she eventually became a living testimony of Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, which says that Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. Our key point today is that Jesus died once for all our sin, and now is our advocate before our Heavenly Father. Our key verse, Romans chapter 8, verse 33. "Who will bring any charge against them whom God has chosen? God bless you. See you tomorrow for another episode of Spiritual Foundations for Life.